For our schedule for today, we're going to start with a presentation by Rachel and I. That should be pretty short. Then we'll have our panel discussion, and then we'll leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions from the attendees. So you should see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A box. So that's where you can type in your questions at any time during the panel discussion. And we'll look at those at the end and then pose them to our panelists. So we'll start off with our presentation. So this is a chart that shows the total value of construction projects in the US from 1997 to 2020, and then it shows 4 years of projections. So the gray regions show economic downturns, with the first one being in 2001 following 9/11, and then the next one being the Great Recession, where we saw an economic downturn in our industry kind of bottoming out at around 2011. And since then, we've seen steady growth in our industry, and the black arrow represents projections from Q1 of 2020, before the pandemic hit, and then the orange and red arrows are kind of some possible outcomes for what we could see ensue after the pandemic. So clearly there's a lot of uncertainty, and we don't really know what the long-term effects are going to be, but some are concerned that we could see a recession almost as bad as what we saw in 2008. So this chart was put together by FMI Corps of Raleigh, North Carolina. They're a management consulting firm for the AEC industry, and they do economic research. So to compare the 2008 recession versus our current COVID-19 pandemic, we see 3 major similarities. The first one being uncertainty. Clearly there's a lot of uncertainty right now. We don't know when we're gonna get back to normal. We could see a second wave in the fall, and we don't really know the full economic impact right now. So that's something that kind of bridges this with the 2008 recession. Another thing would be the stock market collapse. We definitely saw the stock market crash in March, and there's still been a lot of volatility, and that also happened in 2008. The third thing is government response. So in 2008, there was a government response. It was a lot slower because it was a different recession, but so far, we've seen 3 stimulus packages come out of Congress, and we don't know if there's going to be more and what those effects are going to be.
So that said, of course, the current situation is also different and very much unprecedented in a lot of ways from what we did go through in 2008. So, I mean, to start, there's kind of a single concrete cause, being COVID-19, for why our economy suddenly came to a halt this time around. When it comes to why people are not going out and spending money right now, it's really first and foremost driven by health concerns, which is a very different situation than when it's driven by financial concerns. And a lot of the tools that would normally be used on a national scale to provide financial incentives for people to start spending money again are not going to work when we're dealing with a health crisis. And lastly, this has the potential to be a cyclical as opposed to systemic problem, in that this first wave of the pandemic could pass, but we don't know if the virus is going to come back for a second or third time. And overall, the bottom line is we don't know. We're very early into dealing with this crisis, and we don't know in the end how it's going to turn out, if it's going to be more similar or more different than what we saw in 2008 in terms of the effects on our industry. So if there's so much that we don't know about how this will compare to 2008, why are we having this discussion? And the reason is that when we started to think about the questions that many of us are probably asking ourselves at this point, they ring true for any sort of economic downturn. So things like on an individual level, how do I react to changes in my career path, whether that means that you're in a position where you need to change jobs, or whether your role is starting to look a little bit different in your current position. On a firm level, how is my firm gonna survive potential loss of work, and not only survive, but what can we do while the economy is slow so that we're ready to come back, bigger and better when the work does start coming in. And then on an industry level, as SE3, we constantly talk about how we retain the best talent in our industry. And when we're in a position where there might generally be less work in the industry, how do we not go back on those efforts to retain the best talent in our industry? So with that, we're going to jump into our panel discussion, and we'll begin by introducing our panelists and actually really giving them an opportunity to introduce themselves and share just an overview of their story, where they were in their career during the recession, and then we'll get into some more detailed questions. So we'll start with Charlotte. So Charlotte Wong is currently a senior engineer at Burrell Assessor. She has around 10 years of experience in the industry, and she is an SE3 committee member. So Charlotte, I'll go to you to give us an introduction to your story.
Hi, thanks, Rachel. Yeah, first of all, really honored and thankful to be here to be able to share my experience back in 2008. So when the recession first started in 2008, I was a third-year undergraduate student at UC Berkeley. So at that time, I already knew in my mind that I do want to go to grad school to study structural engineering. So I was thinking to myself, well, I'll just kind of wait it out to see how it is since I'm going to be in school. But the recession already started. So I remember going to career fairs and trying to get different internships, but it was already difficult at that time. But then fortunately, I was able to get an internship at a construction management company, and later on at a structural engineering company through networking and some relationship between my professor and the company. And fast forwarding to 2010, end of 2010, that's when I graduated, or about to graduate from grad school. I remember going to office visits in different structural engineering firms, and a lot of the answers I would get from them is, yeah, we're interested in you, or we're interested definitely, but it's really hard to say whether we can hire anyone at this point, but please keep in contact. So I remember at that time it was, yeah, definitely hard to find a job, and some of my classmates, I think they either, some of them went back home or took a few months to find something, or they looked into different opportunities that are structural engineering related, but such as peer or ERI, but not at a structural engineering firm. And for me, I was very fortunate to be able to leverage the previous internship I had and started a designer job at that firm. But I remember at that time, maybe a year after I started, layoffs kind of started to happen in the company. So that's my experience during that 2008 to 11, 12 timeframe for me.
Thanks, Charlotte. Next, we'll hear from Teresa. So Teresa is a vice president at Thornton Tomasetti in their San Francisco office. And she has around 14 years of experience, and she's a past SE3 co-chair.
Thanks, Brenna. Thanks. I'm very glad to be here today as well. So I was, as Brenna said, I have 14 years experience. So I was hired in 2006 a couple of years before the recession started. And one of the things that I kind of noticed, at least in my career during that time, is that it took a little bit of time for it to fully hit the Bay Area. We saw the graph that I think Brenna had shown earlier, and that, you know, the recession, it took a long time. It was a long, drawn out process. And so I feel like it started to hit us and really, really be significant around 2009, 2010. I was lucky enough to keep my job the whole time, though I saw many rounds of layoffs and of people leaving and us not hiring at my firm during that time. So it was it was challenging. And so, you know, going through that, you know, I saw things from kind of a different perspective, staying in and trying to kind of just see where it goes during that point in time.
Thanks, Teresa. So we'll go to Tim next. So Tim Hart is the lead structural engineer at LBNL, and he's also the Simpson Strong Tie Excellence in Engineering Fellow for Build Change. He's a former SEAONC chair and also an SE3 committee member.
So good afternoon, everyone, and I am honored to be participating in this discussion. So I remember very well when I saw the first, there was that press conference when the stock market was crashing and the financial industry was falling apart. I was actually in Hawaii at the time for the SEAONC convention that year. And while I was at the convention, I was being recruited to join another firm. And after debating it for about a couple of months, I finally made the decision to move to that firm, and it was in large part because this was an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. That it was an opportunity that may not be there 6 months from now because the economy was already showing signs of tanking. But at the time, the firm that I was joining was really, really busy. I mean, we had more work than we had people to do it. But that started to change around 2011. The work was slowing down. There was a lot of closed door meetings that were happening among the senior management. Rumors were flying because of those closed door meetings that layoffs were coming. At the time, I was responsible for assigning the staff to projects, and I could see that the projects were dwindling and that there wasn't going to be enough work for everyone going into 2012. So sure enough, in February of 2012, there was the first round of layoffs, and I was one of those that was let go. I kind of had a gut feeling it was coming for reasons I can't really explain, but it was still a shock. So after that, I had lots of interviews with design firms. They all, said, "Yeah, you look good," but no one was hiring for my position, and so it ended up taking 4 months before I was able to get a job offer. I ended up getting 3 job offers, but none of them were with a Bay Area private consulting firm. One of those 3 was from Berkeley Lab, which is where I ended up going. And I got that job, I got that offer based on a referral from one of my former colleagues at the firm I was laid off from. So in between that, in that time, while I was busy working, I was volunteering in Haiti for Build Change, which actually was good in many respects, not just for my own peace of mind, but also it made for quite a few interesting interviews because people would ask me about my experience there. So there was a lot of lessons that I learned from this recession. It was the 3rd recession that I've been in my career. But this one, was certainly the most impactful and taught me personally the most.
Thanks, Tim. Next, we're going to hear from Bill. So Bill is the managing director of the San Francisco office of Walter P. Moore, and he's a past SE3 speed mentor and current long-term mentorship program mentor. Bill, you're still muted.
How about now? Is that better? I knew one of us wasn't going to get the mute right the first time out of the gate. My thanks also to SE3 for putting this on and for the invitation to be part of this group. I have some common themes to what others have shared. Like Tim, the 2008 recession was my third economic slowdown. And also like Teresa, I was am still part of a national firm, but in a San Francisco office. And so that has certain dynamics that make that experience unique. And at that time, we had just opened the San Francisco office. And so we were focused on building a team and building a new platform and business. And we also really were quite busy through 2009 and did not start to see the slowdown until 2009 and 10. So for us, things were viewed as being kind of fragile. Some thought that we might be the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, as the new office, the new kids on the block. So it was critical for me in my role as the managing director to keep our team well informed as much as possible as far as what the company was doing at a high level, at the national level, excuse me, what we were doing to preserve jobs, to cut costs where we could, and to keep the business viable. Morale obviously is also important because where there's uncertainty, there can be fear. And we had a very young staff with 3 people who, like Teresa, had really 1 year or less of experience. And for all of them, it was their first slowdown. So being an encourager, that was a big part of my job at that time, finding ways to keep morale up and finding ways for people to feel like they were being productive and contributing and helping our business be prepared to recover when the economy recovered. So.
Thanks, Bill. So we're gonna move into our kind of first topic of questions. So this is gonna focus on those who find themselves in a position where they're looking for a job amidst an economic downturn. So Charlotte, I'll go to you first. So you touched on it a little bit in your introduction, but you were a student at the time who was trying to enter the industry, looking for entry-level positions. So what was the general landscape for you and your classmates, the challenges you faced, and how did you find ways to navigate those challenges in your job search?
Yeah, so I touched on that a little bit earlier. There are just so many uncertainties in the industry and in the world at that time. So yes, it was very difficult, I think, for all of us. And I remember some of my classmates, I think they not only waited a few months or went back home, they also picked a different field after all. So some people left during that time. I would say that the one thing I did find, in retrospect, that I think was really helpful is really networking, because in a situation like that, I think it was, I sort of mentioned this earlier, but I actually got my internship through a professor who knew someone at that firm to got me a footstep into the door. So, not only is maintaining your grade important, but I think as an entry level or as a student, it's very important that you do go out to networking events or career fair. Don't be afraid to reach out to the firms and try to establish that networking or relationship with them.
Thanks, Charlotte. So Tim, when you were in the process of your job search, I know for you, you had to look at kind of expanding what exactly you were looking for and accept that your new job might be a little bit different from your previous job. So how did you kind of navigate that, keeping in mind what opportunities were open to you, but also finding something that would be a good fit for you?
It took about 4 months, as I mentioned, to find to at least get another offer. My initial search focused on private consulting firms in the Bay Area because I had been my experience for 20 something years. And as I mentioned, I got a number of interviews, and a number of leads, but there was basically no work. So after about a month of that, I realized, okay, if I'm going to find a job, I'm going to have to expand my search and look for work outside of a private consulting firm. And it wasn't an easy thing to do because working for a design firm is what I'd always done and what I'd always wanted to do, and wanted to be a principal and all that, stuff that everybody wants to be, or not almost everybody. So it pushed me out of my comfort zone. And I was forced then to expand my search. So I ended up getting an offer from Berkeley Lab, which is a educational research institution, not a design firm. Of the other 3 offers, the other 2, one was a nonprofit, and then the other actually was Build Change, actually. And the third was a design firm, but it was based in New Zealand. So none of which, like I said, none of that was standard for what I was doing. But at the same time, it was kind of more of a release because I can realize, okay, maybe there is an opportunity for me outside of the design industry, and maybe I was meant to go down that road anyway. So, I mean, the work that I'm doing now, both for Build Change and for Berkeley Lab, it's all very different. I don't do hardly any design work anymore. I don't, which I do miss, but at the same time, I don't have to do any business development anymore, which I definitely do not miss. So, there was, pluses and minuses, but I think in the end, I would have, it was a good thing. And I definitely would not want to have to do that all over again. But I think, one of the things that I realized was, okay, there's opportunities outside of private industry that could be appealing.
Before we move on from this topic, I'll just open it back up to both of you if you have any pieces of advice for people listening who are currently in the situation that you were in at the time.
Maybe I'll just add a little bit. It's similar to what Tim said. I think when you're a student and looking for different jobs, maybe don't limit yourself to just structural engineering, like design firm. There are even, you can consider construction management firms as well. So maybe just be open-minded in the opportunities you're seeking is what I wanted to add. Yeah, thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, a couple of things I could add. One is getting laid off tested my patience, tested my resolve. It also tested my pocketbook. There's no getting around that. So it is a test that you just have to endure. It is important to, as Charlotte alluded to have a strong network of people. I definitely relied on that. because, you know, the 3 offers that I received were all initiated by contacts that I had in the industry with former colleagues, and in one case, current colleagues. Without those contacts, I doubt I would even been able to find those positions. And I would say for people coming out of school who may not, you know, the colleagues, the contacts don't necessarily have to be firm leaders. They could be classmates that you had who may know something or may have heard something at a particular firm where things may open up. So I would say, you know, don't be worried that if you're just, you know, with a few years of experience, don't be worried that your contacts do not include firm leaders. It could be, you know, any of your colleagues could come to the rescue for you when the need arises.
Thanks, Tim. Teresa, I wanted to ask how your workload changed as a result of having coworkers laid off during the recession.
Thanks, Brenna. So I think for what we had I think that most of the layoffs were a little bit lagging. So honestly, when people were laid off, I was like, okay, good. Now we have enough work. We're not trying to struggle, trying to grasp at things. But one of the things I would specifically say about that is that workload might be different. It might not be exactly what you went into this expecting structural engineering to be. I was very, very fortunate that my firm does have a lot of different practice sectors. So specifically, you know, I focus on new design. That's what I do. But during this time, I went over and did some work with insurance adjusters, or doing some forensic work, things that again, you might not have been thinking that this is exactly what I wanted to do. But I think that really actually in the end, getting outside of your comfort zone, doing something a little bit different, being willing to be flexible really does add to your career as a whole. I'm very thankful that I was able to do that. And I might not have been able to do that except for the recession. Normally I would have just kind of stuck in my lane and done what I had come out of school to do. And I really do think that it provided me an opportunity to grow and to become a better engineer. So I'd say make sure to open your horizons even within your own firm if you're still there, or again, similar to what Charlotte was saying, if you're looking for other sorts of work, because it can, again, make a better engineer in the end.
Thanks. Charlotte, did you see your workload change at all once the layoffs started happening when you started?
Yeah, my experience is similar to Teresa's, I think, where before the layoffs happened, we were actually a bit slow. And then, you know, we were actually developing tools, but then actually afterwards, we don't have to, or we can stop kind of worrying about like, oh, what should we do tomorrow when we get to the office? So yeah, it's similar that way. My takeaway from the layoffs and the restructuring at that time is that, you know, in school we learn a lot about engineering skills, and those are all very important. They are the foundation of what we do. But what I took away from that is the business side of things are very important as well. Project diversity, business development, cash flow, how a company is structured. I think having the recession or having the layoffs and restructure within half a year to a year that I started working, it really helped me to realize how important our soft skills and business side of things are in our career. It's not only just about engineering.
Thank you. Bill, so what was your experience like managing a firm? What were the kind of things that the discussions that you were having at a management level during the recession?
So just to be clear, I was managing the San Francisco office as a part of the overall firm. So at the time, I think we had 11 US offices. So there was one piece of that was the importance of cascading messages that were coming down from our CEO and from our CFO and others, for example, as far as what we were doing across the firm to try and to reduce expenses. That was one of our strategies, was to bring our overall firm expenses down, so cutting overhead where it was possible. And that meant that our training budgets basically disappeared. Conferences, travel to meetings, employee events, those were painful, but those were basically eliminated. All ways that the company was trying to engage in order to preserve jobs. I think the second piece of that was then with similar to what Teresa and Charlotte have shared, is where we had some dips in our workload, is that we looked creatively to work share with our other offices. So that put people out of their comfort zones. People who were used to working on projects in California in seismic design category D were now working on projects in Houston where there was no seismic. And that just took a little bit of adjusting for folks to realize that wind controlled everything. So people were flexible. Some even traveled and spent a couple weeks in another location in order to go to work where there was work and there was a need. So there was a lot of work share balancing across our firm, and that required people to be flexible. Some of that also involved some sort of investigative and diagnostic work. So we just look for different ways to keep people billable on projects. And then if we couldn't, then we engage them in other ways to help research prospective clients and prospective projects on the BD side of things, and I think that helped people understand the business operation, that a structural engineering firm is not just about doing WL squared over 8, but there's a whole lot to be considered to enable us to do the design work that we love to do.
So what were some of those things that you did when there wasn't enough billable work for staff?
Well, one of those things that I suggest is where we knew there might be some work coming up, we put people to work doing some online research on, it might have been capital improvement plans with a certain entity, doing some other Google search to try and gather background, what we call client intelligence or project intelligence. Other things that we did is, I think at that time we were recently, we're just coming through a significant code change. And so there were a number of our, for example, design spreadsheets that needed to be updated to current code. So we would put people to work on what we call sharpening the saw, that is getting some of our design tools updated, refined, improved. It may have been things like building Dynamo scripts in Revit to make doing some of our work more efficient, so that when we came out of the recession, we would be ready to hit the ground running.
Great. So back to Charlotte, I wanted to ask if there were any things that you dealt with to help you with increased engagement within your firm. Did you feel your motivation drop or morale kind of drop at all during this time, and what did you do to deal with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think people were anxious. I think Tim kind of mentioned that before, if you see people in closed doors meetings, or you see one round of layoffs, all of a sudden, we're definitely kind of working a bit on edge. I think, like, oh, would I be next? And also, at that time, the layoffs that happened, they were people, let me think, I think with about 3 to 4 years of experience to more associate level. So I think for people who were just out of school, I remember feeling guilty about it. But, you know, like, oh, why did you hire me? And then, you know, within a year, you lay off all these people. But I think that doesn't help with the morale, you know. So I think the company at that time was trying to make us feel better by trying to be as transparent as possible. And for us, we just, you know, try to tell ourselves, okay, we just got to do our best. You know, we got to help the company in whatever way we want to be as efficient as we can. So yeah, it was low for a while, but we just think our mindset was we just got to do our best and trust that the leadership, would get us through this.
Gotcha. How about you, Teresa? Was there anything that you were doing to keep up morale, stay engaged?
Yeah, I would say I would second pretty much everything Charlotte said. I mean, it's stressful to keep your job also in times like this, just because it is such a strange thing to go through. I would say that on our side, one of the things that myself and my colleagues would do to try to keep up our morale was just to lean on each other, to become a close group of friends. I think that that's one of the reasons that I had such a close-knit cohort of folks, is that those of us, even some that were laid off, you know, stay in touch with them and kind of come back together. I know it's a little bit harder now since this is a slightly different situation. We would go out for drinks, kind of hang out on the weekends, that sort of thing, to boost our morale. So this is a little bit different, but we're clearly all getting creative. And so I'd say anything that you can do to kind of stay in touch, stay socially together with people really does help. And it can create a very, very close-knit group of people that's very helpful for times like these.
Yeah, thanks. Bill, was there anything that you were doing from a management level to try to keep staff morale up?
Yes, absolutely. Certainly I think being transparent, somebody else mentioned that, as possible with what you know about what's going on and also what you don't know, and just being honest. I think that built a level of trust that was important for our team. And I don't mean this to be self-serving because it's SE3, but honestly, we encourage people to be engaged with, to get engaged with SEAONC committees and SEAONC committee work, because that was just a way to dive in, to feel like you were contributing to something. It was also a way to build relationships outside of our firm and see how others were struggling with the same things. And you kind of know that, okay, it's not just, I'm not the only one who's feeling this way, or some of these frustrations. I think the one thing I do clearly remember that we did is we had bowling and beer Fridays, and bowling not in this sort of traditional sense of going out. We had this heavy duty Nerf bowling set that one of my partners brought in, and it just kind of took off. People got into it. They were very competitive. Each person was given a nickname, not of their choosing, but of somebody else's choosing. And of course, being good structural engineers, we had to build a spreadsheet. I don't take credit for that. One of my dear friends did that, but she built this amazing spreadsheet that you could graph and track statistics, who was trending upwards, who was trending downwards. And it just kind of became this thing that every Friday afternoon at 4:30, people hung out for an hour together to do this. So I would just encourage people to look for serendipitous ways. And of course, in our current situation, it's more difficult to do that. But whether it's virtual happy hours or some other type of small cohort gaming competition online, I think there are ways you can bring people together and just have fun.
Great, thanks for that. Sounds like fun.
So we'll have to figure out a way to organize a virtual bowling and beer for the next SE3 event. So I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of longer term effects of going through this recession and then going through the recovery, and how you all still see the effect that your experience had on you personally, or in your career, or on the industry as a whole. So I will ask Tim first. I know this was a pretty profound change in your career and also kind of contributed to personal growth for you. So can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. So certainly on both a professional and a personal level, getting laid off changed my life in ways that you would expect, and also perhaps ways that you wouldn't expect. So I went from being went from working for a private firm and having hopes and even discussions with management about being an owner and a principal. Now I'm working for an institution and for a nonprofit where, ownership there's no such thing as an ownership. So the career trajectory is completely different now. It was a difficult situation. As I mentioned at the beginning, it was something that I, in my gut, kind of thought might be coming. At the time, certainly I was upset. But reflecting back on it, I realized, well, there were reasons why I was selected to be let go. And a lot of those reasons were related to just the fact that the firm didn't have enough work to keep me busy. It wasn't a personal thing. It was a business thing. So, it's, as I like to tell people, it's an experience that I've forgiven, but I haven't forgotten. It is, I still keep in contact with many of my former colleagues there, including the principal who gave me the notice that I was being laid off. So it's not as if I cut the cord and ran away and bashed them every chance I get. It did teach me, one of the lessons that I learned was, and I think Charlotte alluded to this earlier, was doing a better job at improving my soft skills. And by the soft skills, I mean things such as keeping clients happy, having the importance of having a professional network, keeping under budget. That was one of the reasons why I suspect I was let go, because I was managing projects that were going over budget, some of which I was responsible for, some of which was extenuating circumstances, but nonetheless, they were my projects and I was responsible for them, and that's what happened. So learning that was very valuable, to keep in mind that there are three things involved with this. There's budget, there's schedule, and there's quality. And I had always focused just on the quality, and budget and schedule kind of was secondary. And that was a hard lesson to learn, that okay, they're a lot more important than I thought they were. So having gone through the experience of looking for a job, as I mentioned many times, it's important to have that network, and also important to find a job that you can fit into, and fits into your value system. To not be so desperate for work that you just take the first job that comes across the transom. Because that job may not be the best fit for you, and you may end up back looking for work again within a couple of years. And even if you do find that job, yes, you'll get that initial security, and yes, you'll be able to deposit checks again, But, you know, 5 years on, are you going to be happy there? Are you going to be, you know, is it more trouble than it's worth having that particular position? So that was another thing that I learned, was how important it is to find a position that fits in with, not just with your skill set, but also with your value system and what your career goals are. And that was another thing I learned was, you know, defining what my career goals are and be willing to change them as the situation mandated it.
Thanks, Tim. So Teresa, you were early on in your career when you experienced this, and you alluded to how it kind of gave you an opportunity to expand the kinds of things you were working on. So now as you've moved up in your career and you're now in more of a management position, how has that kind of influenced how you work, how you think about managing others, and what have you taken forward from it?
Yeah, so I definitely think that all of this kind of came into, you know, talking about, you know, looking at project finances, making sure that your projects are doing well, as well as kind of the office and everything around you is doing well. That has all kind of played into where I am now, because you're absolutely right. I'm kind of more in the management role at this point, looking at things. So yeah, I took all of those different experiences and have kind of utilized them to grow. I think that it allowed me to kind of grow quickly and to kind of understand a wider variety of things. Again, even with that, again, as I mentioned, the flexibility early on, kind of just doing other things, whatever can kind of keep you busy. Yeah, it's just really allowed for me to see things from a different perspective, that if things had just been good, I don't know if I would have been able to see from that other perspective. Because as an engineer, I think, kind of getting to what Tim was talking about, you focus on the quality. Like, you've got to provide like really great designs, really great work, but you do have to also pay attention to the finances and to kind of that other side and business development, the people around you and the people that you're working with. Pulling that all together. And so sometimes having this external stress allows you to actually see that a little bit clearer than you would otherwise.
Thanks, Teresa. And similarly for you, Charlotte, you're kind of in that experience range where a lot of us now see a bit of a gap in the industry because there were fewer people who entered at the time. So has that had any impact on your experience as you moved up through your career?
Yeah, like you said, I think there are just fewer of us in this experience level. So I actually think that, you know, thinking back in hindsight, it's actually okay. I think just because there are fewer of us, I think the positive thing that I could take from it is that it actually enabled me to have a greater exposure to managing more things or do more projects because there are fewer of us. So I think in the long term, it was okay. That you know, it is hard to hire people probably at this range of experience, but I think from my experience, it turned out okay because of that.
Thanks, Charlotte. And then Bill, from your end, how has this experience influenced how you think about bringing work into the firm in terms of what you think about when you pitch yourself or what you can offer clients, and also just the range of work that you go after to be prepared for times like this?
It once again, I think, impressed on me the importance of having a diversity in our type of business. You know, if you're only doing, say, multifamily residential, when times are good, there's enough of it to keep you busy 100% of the time. But when the economy turns, if that one market niche that you're in goes south, you're in trouble. So the value in having a diverse business base of projects in multiple sectors, be it commercial, healthcare, higher education, sports, aviation, wherever you can find a place to be, new buildings as well as renovating and retrofitting and investigating existing buildings. It makes your business more resilient. And I would say that cascading down from that is building a team of people, and this goes to themes that others have shared here, is who are also capable and of doing more than, say, only post-tension concrete. You know, as an individual, your value to the firm, and I think to your as a structural engineer, is greater if you're able to work with different materials and in different building types. That improves your value to the firm, improves your personal value and your own personal brand. So diversity, I think, was probably the most important thing that I take away.
And is there anything that you, like one key takeaway that you took from the 2008 recession into this present situation we're in? Does anyone have anything else to add?
I can add something following up to what Bill is saying. I think as the staff engineer, like he alluded to earlier, you know, it's very important that we are diverse in our skill set. So one thing that I've taken away from the last recession is, you know, reflect on what types of projects or what kind of skill sets I've been learning over the years. And if I found myself being pigeonholed in certain area or just really only exposed to certain area, I've learned to be more proactive within my firm, you know, to really try to broaden my skill set. So I think having a mindset that is proactive and also, you know, keep our resumes updated, you know, regularly, because we never know when a recession or pandemic would happen, you know. So if we try to think back to all the projects we've worked on in the last 5 years, you know, it would be so difficult to remember all that. So I think just learning a habit of keeping our LinkedIn profile or resume updated would be very important. And I think a lot of you guys talked about this already as well. Just keeping our networking and relationship is very important. And I try to treat, you know, everyone that I work with, you know, whether it's inside a company or even contractors or architects I work with, as a new relationship that I can build on and expand on, you know, not just like, oh, that architect, you know. I think we can take every opportunity to establish a new relationship or meet a new friend. Yeah, that's, thanks, Brenda. Yep.
That's great. Does anyone else have anything they want to add?
Well, just to follow on with what Charlotte was saying, I do keeping your skills fresh and making sure that you're looking at a lot of things. One thing that I would note is always make sure that your mentor or your managers or everybody around you knows if there's something that you're missing that you want to know more about. Be vocal. Make sure that you tell them that, because they've got a ton of other things going on. They might forget. They might know, but just forget. So make sure that you're vocal about, you know, the things that you're interested in. And then also maybe do some research on those outside of your actual projects, outside of work. Read research papers, stay on top of things, so that you're taking kind of charge of making sure that you are as flexible as possible in what your skill set is structurally. I think that's huge and can really help out long term.
Thanks. Does anyone else have anything, Bill?
Yeah, I would just second everything that Charlotte and Teresa just said. This, and for me personally, it's sort of this idea of building a personal brand. It makes you more resilient. It makes you more valuable. So whether it's through building a network of relationships, as Charlotte mentioned, with people who are not structural engineers, right? When you go to this event or that event, don't just cluster with the other structural engineers that you haven't seen since the last SEAONC meeting, but go meet some new architects or some mechanical engineers or other folks. Be interested in what they're doing, build that network. You can do that through getting involved in other professional organizations, and there are too many to name. But that helps you then be able to build, and you want to be able to tell your story to somebody else about the value that you bring as a structural engineer, whether it's in design or like Tim in managing teams in an institution. I think that makes you career resilient, if you will, for the long haul.
And one thing I can add, I mean, first of all, I second everything that's been said so far. My experience has been very similar. The one thing I would add to that would be, keep your options open and keep your bridges intact, because you never know when if you're going to be at the same firm for the rest of your career. I mean, I've been at firms, not just the one that I got laid off from, but other firms have had layoffs. It's been everybody from first year people to principals who have been let go. So you never really know. So it's important to keep that resume up and to build that skill set and be able to market yourself, not just within your firm while you're there, but of course when you're looking for work elsewhere. I mean, if you've already have that skill set in place, if you do get laid off, you're already ready to go versus trying to scramble and figure out what to do and panicking and whatever. When I went through the first recession back in 91, 92, I didn't get laid off then, but there were talks at that firm about it. And one of the things that I learned then was something a principal at another firm that I was interviewing with told me, which was, this is a very small world of structural engineering, particularly in the Bay Area. So everybody knows of everyone else. And I was just, this young punk that was just coming into the business at that time, but he was right. Everybody knows everybody here. So if you're in a situation where you're going to be looking for a job, you don't want to be in a case where everybody, all the people who might potentially hire you, think you're terrible or crappy or, are going to set the firm on fire or something. I don't know. But, just keep your options open. And like I said, don't burn any bridges.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So we have a number of really great questions coming in, so I'm glad to have a good chunk of time to devote to those. So let's see, I'll start with one that's pretty central to the mission of SE3, and I see we've got some likes on this question as well, so people are interested. So did the recession and struggle to find a job take a toll on your confidence in pursuing structural engineering as a career? Confidence both personally and professionally. Were there moments where you considered leaving to go into a more stable profession?
Well, I can go first on that one, I guess. Yes, it does affect your confidence. More so, it was more the case in 91, 92 versus this versus 2008, because like I said, at that time I was only a couple years out of school, and the fact that they were even talking about layoffs at that point, it was like, okay, what am I going to do if I do get laid off? Is this going to be the end of my career? Do I have to move back home? What am I going to do with my life? So fortunately, I was not let go. I eventually did leave on my own terms. But even in 2008, it was already, close to 20 years in the profession, I didn't really think about leaving the profession at that point because, after 20 years in the business, where am I going to go? I can't go back to school at that point or do anything else. But even still, yes, it does take a toll on your confidence. Certainly, it did for me. You just have to have faith in yourself that you know what you're doing and that you've been in the business long enough that, okay, you can actually do the work that you've been in the business for 20 years. There's a reason why you've had 20 years of work. It wasn't because my father was in the business, which he wasn't. It was because I was doing good work. And it was just having the confidence in believing that and having the confidence to be able to express that in interviews to the people who were looking to hire me.
Does anyone have anything to add to this question, or we'll move on? Okay.
So I'll take the next one. This is Natalie's question. If new graduates and/or engineers who have been laid off and are not able to find a job right away, what would you recommend for them to do as an alternative to earn income, build their resumes, or enhance their profiles? Does anyone have any thoughts?
Well, I'll offer up a couple thoughts. There are related or allied professions to structural engineering. So if you find yourself, for example, with the opportunity to say, go to work for a contractor for a little while, it might be outside your comfort zone, but getting in the field to see how things are built, even if it's not traditional multi-story buildings, I think structural engineering firms generally look favorably upon experience with a contractor.
Yeah, and then I think Bill or Tim had mentioned in his time between jobs that he went to work for a build change and did volunteer work. So while that's not really an option right now due to the shelter in place, some volunteer opportunities or taking like an unpaid internship. Charlotte mentioned some of her classmates going to work at EERI or PEER. Those are great opportunities.
We have a couple questions that I'd go back to Bill on about cost cutting versus making the decision to let go of staff during 2008. So one question, in the 2008 recession, did your firm use other cost cutting measures such as cutting hours or salary, et cetera, instead of or in addition to layoffs? And then we've got a follow-up question that could go to other panelists, that thoughts from staff versus management on salary cuts versus layoffs.
Yeah, great question. So at that time, our firm started by cutting expenses wherever it could. The list of things that I mentioned before, like employee events, company travel, things like funding snacks in the office place, et cetera, whatever was not essential to operating the business. When it became clear that that was not going to be enough and the recession was going to be extending for a while, then we implemented pay cuts across the board. And they were more at the principal and senior principal level, they were scaled up to be more substantial. And of course, there were no bonuses for a while. And we didn't start doing layoffs until after we could see that the impact of those reductions was not going to be enough, that there just wasn't enough work coming in. So I think the one lesson that we took away from that is that we all wish that we had, I think, acted sooner and a little bit more decisively up front. And while it might feel more painful up front, it's less painful than having it like slowly taking the Band-Aid off bit by bit and implementing cut after cut after cut when you're not seeing the end of, or the beginning of the recovery, excuse me.
I think there are a few questions now kind of looking forward into what we're experiencing now specifically. One is, what are the different areas within the SE industry that you believe are going to struggle or conversely be more stable during this recession or potential recession, I suppose? For example, healthcare, higher education, single home residential infrastructure, etc.
I mean, I would start with right now. I think that we are looking for that. We see that healthcare will likely be to some degree still have some work going on. Though I will note that the healthcare industry is also struggling because all of this has taken away the ability for them to do any of the elective procedures that is generally actually how they make their money. So while the need for healthcare is very much out there clearly, and also, I mean, we're also in the state of California here. There's the next round of seismic upgrades. It's still necessary for a lot of facilities. While right now it looks okay, I want to continue to watch to see kind of how the different healthcare facilities are functioning and how they're kind of still making money when they can't do those elective procedures. So I kind of took the low-hanging fruit there, guys. Sorry about that, but you know, that's one of my thoughts on that one.
Yeah, let me add to that. This, unlike any of the past 3 economic slowdowns that I've been a part of, this one is, I think, unprecedented in its scale and how broad it is. I mean, nearly every industry or market sector, if you will, is getting hammered. Education is getting hammered because they don't know if they're going to have revenue from student tuition and people in dormitories. Their donations are way down. You know, anything having to do with any kind of mass assembly of people, be it in convention centers, sports facilities, even churches, you know, those all bets are off as to when we'll be able to gather in large groups again. So, boy, it's really tough right now to say. I think you're going to find about the only, I think, industry that is going to continue to do well for a while is probably life sciences and biotech, because there's going to be a renewed efforts to obviously not just for a vaccine for COVID-19, but other there's discussion that we may be faced with this type of risk now going forward for a long time. And so there's going to be more funding to be more proactive to look for and protect against similar occurrences like this with the next pandemic type virus that might be out there.
Yeah. And I think that this is just kind of building on what Bill said. I think that this is, it's interesting. There's definitely no real recession-proof market sector out there right now. So this is where having that diversity and kind of making sure that you've got a broad portfolio is really, really, really helpful.
Yeah, thanks. One of the other questions that I thought was interesting. So can anyone share experiences regarding salary negotiations post-recession? Did you even bother, or do you still try to negotiate when you know that margins are really thin and there have been layoffs and such? So I don't know, Charlotte, did you try to negotiate when you got your first job?
No, it was like really hard to get anything at that point already. So no, I didn't really. You mean at that time, right? When I first trying to look for the first job, not post,
right?
Not like after a few years afterwards. Yeah, no, not too much. And the pay was okay too. I felt like, but it's, yeah, I just didn't feel like it was the right place to do so, since we're all kind of struggling at that time.
Yeah. Teresa, did you have any experiences with that, like asking for raises and that?
No, I mean, yeah, I think that it was made pretty clear, that raises were minimal. The firm was very, very clear about all of that when the recession was happening and trying to be very transparent. So no, I definitely didn't really try for that because I don't think that there was any room. I could have asked, but it wouldn't have really gone anywhere. I've always felt like I had enough open and honestness with all of the managers above me to have those conversations. But just from other conversations, it was clear that there was nothing that was going to happen there. So yeah. No.
Right. How long do you think it took until you felt comfortable doing that again in the recovery process?
It was a while for us, just because of when do you get back to feeling like finances are good again, because you kind of stay gun shy for a while about kind of, are things actually okay? Like, yes, it looks good right now, but is it really? So I'd say it took quite a while. And again, the recession was very long. It was a long drawn out thing. But what I would say there is as much as you feel open and feel like you can have those conversations, just have the conversation, even outside of a specific, like going in to talk about raises or promotions or anything. Try to have some conversations with the management around you, even if it's just, one level up from you. They might know a little bit more and might be able to give you some insight. Yeah, you just use everybody that you can to kind of understand where things are and what you can push for.
Yeah, that's a great thought.
I think we have time for probably one to two more questions before we sign off. So some questions about any insight we have on how long this recession might last, or what we look for in terms of coming out of a downturn. So yeah, two parts to this one. Does anyone have any insight on what kind of delayed reaction we will see? Answer might be no at this point. And then secondly, what signs did SE firms see that indicated that the SE industry was picking back up after 2008? And will we be looking for the same signs this go around?
I'll start. You know, in our firm, we talk about the fact that there are three economies. There's the U.S. economy, there's the AEC industry economy, and then there's our firm's economy. So I think in general, the AEC industry, that economy, it tends to lag. It lags, like right now, for example, we're all working off backlogs of work that we've already have under contract. So our decline in work is going to lag from when this recession has actually started. And likewise, our recovery, rebuilding of our backlog will also likely lag anywhere from 12 to 18 months, probably after the economy picks up again. And we saw that, you know, after the Great Recession ended, a lot of AEs and construction firms were still struggling because the money was just not getting to the owners and others who would fund capital programs. So I think there's going to, whatever someone tells you about when the economy was recovering, I would add another 12 months to when our economy as structural engineers will begin to see some of that trickle down.
Yeah, and I would second that. I mean, as I mentioned before, that this would be now my fourth recession that I've gone through, and in all the previous three, that was the case. Initially, there was still plenty of work to go around. The downturn didn't occur until 12 to 18 months after the initial crashes. And even though this recession happened much more suddenly than the previous ones did, the others were kind of a slow down versus a sudden stop like this one has been. But I don't see any reason to think that there's still going to be that lag time. Now, the one difference there may be is if things start up as quickly as they slow down, in this case, then we might see a sooner recovery, might even avoid the lag time, but it's really going to depend upon how things restart. If it goes the way it usually does, then I would expect to see, in 12 months' time, that there's going to be slowdowns at all the firms, at most of our firms.
Okay. So I think we should end with our most liked question here. So most of us are working from home, have been doing so for the past 2 months. So the question is, how are we doing in terms of efficiency and productivity? And I'm going to extend that to how are we doing in terms of employee engagement and motivation, and what are some things that have been working for you all, whether it's for you personally or for you to help your staff?
Okay, I'll jump in. Boy, that was a multifaceted question. So I'm just going to tackle one facet, and because I'm concerned about my team as managing director. Everybody's in a different season of life, I call it. We have, and it ranges from people who are parents of young children or school-age children at home that suddenly find themselves thrust into being homeschoolers in addition to structural engineers, and how do you fit that together in the day? There are others who are, for whom their work cohort was their most important social circle, and now that's been pulled away from them. Some of them are far away from homes, in some cases overseas. And so I think there's the importance of keeping those folks connected with others, especially if they're living alone. So, you know, in my case, I'm an empty nester now, so my kids have moved out, so I don't have the distractions of homeschooling, but just figuring out how to work from home and set up boundaries, right? Make a routine of working from home so that I'm productive and yet can still be available and connect with people who need to connect. It's different for everybody and it's different for all of us. So we're just having to be open and transparent with one another, saying, is this working? Do we need to find a different way to connect or a different time of day? Do we need to schedule phone calls? It seems silly, right? But when we can't get up and walk around and go check in with somebody or go ask somebody questions, that those are the ways that I think we have to adapt in this, as long as we're working from home. So flexibility and adaptability, I think, are critical right now.
I'll jump in there and say that, kind of building on that, it's the communication part. It's making sure that almost over communicate with the people around you, because we don't have the visual social cues that we normally do in the office. Again, being able to kind of see when someone's struggling or when they need some additional work or whatever. You just always need to communicate with everybody kind of at all levels. And I think that that's the biggest challenge that I see. We've got at least a lot of good technology that's helping us. Thank goodness we have video calls like this, so we're able to do some of that communication. But it's hard and it takes a little bit more effort than we're used to. So I think it gets also back to Bill saying, you know, maybe you need to schedule some calls. Absolutely. I think that making sure that we have those calls scheduled, and then you don't hesitate to just pick up the phone when you need to, or chat on whatever your instant messenger is, or send emails, or do whatever works best for those individuals. It's just even more important than it normally is to kind of find the right way to communicate and keep communicating. We're kind of getting into this rut now where we've been doing this now for what, 11, 12 weeks, something like that at this point, at least. And so I feel like some of that communication is falling off. So just making sure that we put that as a priority, to make sure that both that, you know, your managers know what you're doing, as well as a manager, you know what your team is doing, and that everybody has the right support and is still learning. Because we know as engineers, we're always learning. That's why most of us do this, is that we get to continue to grow. And that's so much harder when you don't have people around you constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I can add, or a couple of things I can add to that. One is what I found to be really valuable is to set up regular calls with my team, which is not something we were doing before we were all working from home. But now that we are working from home, we talk at least, you know, once a day, every day, and it not only allows everybody to keep track of what everybody else is doing, it allows everybody to, you know, if they have questions or if there's something they need to review, we have that opportunity. But it also provides a means of connection that we're missing when everybody's sitting at home. But now, okay, we have at least once a day where we're dedicated, you know, our group has a dedicated time where we can, you know, talk about, you know, our Zoom backgrounds or you know, something like, you know, something crazy like that. So I found that to be very, very important. And the other thing that I'm finding to be very important is making sure, as Bill mentioned, to establish those boundaries. You know, I get requests now for, you know, 8 to 10 Zoom calls a day, and that just drives me crazy. So, you know, being able to establish the boundaries and say, okay, I'm going to be available during these times, but not during those times because I have other things I need to do. It's a lot harder to do that when you're not, you know, you're not sitting in the same building. So it's, I'm still trying to figure that out, how best to establish those boundaries and also to enforce those boundaries, because, you know, enforcement can be hard when people are begging and pleading with you for things. But there's only so much, you know, so much you can do and so many calls you can take in a day.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Tim. So we're going to wrap up. We're right at 1:30 now, but we wanted to thank our panelists. Thank you for taking the time. I think this was really great, and I think our attendees probably learned a lot. So we also wanted to thank the SEAONC office, Yesenia and Juliana, for helping us put together this webinar and walking us through it. And then a few SE3 members, Natalie, Tim, Cott, and then Megan Stringer and the SEAONC board for their guidance in setting this up. And then we also want to thank our attendees for listening and spending this lunch with us. And we hope to see you at an in-person event soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.